Hi there, and welcome to This Day in History. Today we're going to enjoy a rerun for December 21st from a previous year. Enjoy, and thank you so much for watching. Hello, and welcome to This Day in History for December 21st. December 21st is the 355th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar, with 10 days remaining until the end of the year. Today's word is hawkshaw, a 19th century term that means detective, investigator, police detective. A hawkshaw is a police officer who investigates crimes. This comes to us after the name of the detective in the 1863 play The Ticket of Leave Man by Tom Taylor. The character also appeared in a comic strip called Hawkshaw the Detective by Gus Major. So this is a case where an author created a character, and the character's name has become a nickname for the profession of that character. Earliest documented use of this term is 1863. And with that, we're going to start in the year 1866, when, determined to challenge the growing American military presence in their territory, Native Americans in northern Wyoming lured Lieutenant Colonel William Fetterman and his soldiers into a deadly ambush on this day in 1866. In 1945, General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army, died from injuries suffered not in battle, but in a freak car accident. He was 60 years old. 1958, 3 months after a new French Constitution was approved, Charles de Gaulle was elected the first president of the Fifth Republic by a sweeping majority of French voters. The previous June, France's World War II hero was called out of retirement to lead the country when a military and civilian revolt in Algeria threatened France's stability. In 1967, a movie called The Graduate opened in New York. Based on a 1963 novel by Charles Webb, The Graduate was an uneasy exploration of what it meant to be young and adrift in a time of extraordinary confusion and upheaval. On December 21, 1968, Apollo 8, the first manned mission to the moon, was successfully launched from Cape Canaveral, Florida, with astronauts Frank Borman, James Lovell Jr., and Williams Anders aboard. We'll probably talk about it again when it comes around on Christmas Eve that they entered into orbit around the moon, the first manned spacecraft ever to do so. During Apollo 8's 10 lunar orbits, television images were sent back home, and spectacular photos were taken of Earth and the moon from the spacecraft. In addition to being the first human beings to view firsthand their homeworld in its entirety, the 3 astronauts were also the first to see the dark side of the moon. On December 21, 1970, rock star Elvis Presley was greeted at the White House by President Richard M. Nixon. Presley's visit was not just a social call. He wanted to meet with Nixon in order to offer his services in the government's war on drugs. He didn't have an appointment. I believe he had met with the vice president at some point in time earlier and decided to just show up at the White House. They did receive him, and they were gracious to him, but they didn't take his offer seriously. He wanted to have a more hands-on role in that capacity, but they never called him back. In 1972, the union of 6 small Gulf kingdoms, to which a 7th was soon added, created a small state called the United Arab Emirates. Though small, this union has had an outsized role in the global economy. On December 21, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 from London to New York exploded in midair over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing all passengers on board, along with the crew members, as well as 11 Lockerbie residents on the ground. A bomb had been hidden inside an audio cassette player detonated in the cargo area when the plane was at an altitude of 31,000 feet. The disaster became the subject of Britain's largest criminal investigation, and that sort of event right there is why it is such an ordeal to fly commercially. Margaret Waldstein was born in Hamburg, Germany in May of 1906. She studied art in her homeland and then later moved to Rio de Janeiro and worked as a photographer. In Brazil, she became reacquainted with a fellow named Hans Rey, born Hans Reyersbach, a fellow Hamburg native that she had met as a child. They got married in 1935 and relocated to Paris, France, where Hans was a newspaper cartoonist and Margaret wrote advertising copy. In 1939, a children's book called Raffi and the 9 Monkeys, written and illustrated by Hans, was published in France. An English language version of the book was titled Cecily G. and the 9 Monkeys. One of the monkeys in the book, who was always getting into trouble, served as the model for Curious George. As the Rays worked on the manuscript for what would become the first Curious George book, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party continued their rise to power in Europe. In June of 1940, shortly before the Nazis entered Paris, Hans and Margaret escaped the city on homemade bicycles, taking with them little more than a collection of their manuscripts. They traveled to Spain, Portugal, and Brazil, and then sailed to New York. Curious George was published in 1941, and the Rays collaborated on 6 sequels, including Curious George Takes a Job, Curious George Flies a Kite, Curious George Goes to the Hospital. Hans illustrated the books while Margaret did the writing. Despite their partnership, Hans initially received sole credit on the covers as H.A. Ray because the couple's publisher thought it would distinguish their books from the glut of female children's book authors at the time. According to the Los Angeles Times, barely 5 feet tall and red-haired, Ray said she occasionally served as her artist husband's human model for their impish little monkey. She would scrunch up her face, move her limbs about, or even leap from one piece of furniture to another. After Hans died in 1977, Margaret went on to collaborate with Alan Shallak on more than 24 Curious George books, as well as an animated TV show. A team continues to produce additional books in the series to this day, and today the Rays' creation remains a beloved character in children's literature. Curious George books have been translated into multiple languages, sold millions of copies, and spawned a variety of merchandising deals. Margaret Ray died on this day in 1996 at the age of 90. On December 21, 2012, the music video for Gangnam Style, a song by the Korean rapper Psy, became the first YouTube video to garner 1 billion views. As I report this in 2019, it currently has over 3 billion views. And as we watch this in 2022, it's got 4.6 billion views. Wow. I've placed a link to it in the show notes in case you haven't seen it yet, or if it's been a while. And I think that's going to do it for us today. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes. Thanks for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and feel free to share it around. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Alrighty, back to work. Okie dokie, Smokey. Let's just rearrange that a little bit. Just read it like it's written. That's not the way I like to tell it anyway. We don't need all those words. Hope I pronounced that right. So many edits. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? Did not a man. Did I do this whole thing without a microphone? Dadgummit. This is why I don't do live shows. And I think that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share this video with a link in your email, messaging, or social media. If you enjoyed this series, you can check out the playlist that contains these videos. I'll put a link to that in the description. That description lives on YouTube, so for other platforms, I'll include the link to my blog page that is called No Really. You can also find me on Rumble, Parler, BitChute, and Getter. All those links in that description. Alrighty, that's all I can think of right now. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.